Every creative discovery is a creative leap of thought. And for that creative leap of thought, the creator has gone deep inside of himself or herself, make that leap, bring the insight, and then that insight has been manifested in the outer arena. In other words, in the moment that a creative creates, every creative encounters a deeper aspect of the self that I call the quantum self.
As we examine the fabric of the cosmos ever more closely, we may well find far more surprises than anyone ever imagined. Take me, for example. I seem real enough, don't I? Well, yes. But surprising new clues are emerging that everything, you and I, and even space itself, may actually be a kind of hologram.
Is the three-dimensional world an illusion in the same sense that a hologram is an illusion? Perhaps. I'm inclined to think yes, that the three-dimensional world is a kind of illusion, and that the ultimate precise reality is the two-dimensional reality at the surface of the universe.
They understand that things are not the way they appear to be, very much like the Hindus see the world as Maya, illusion, and not true. They also believe the same thing. And they say that the world does not actually exist in the way that we think it does. We see it as real, as solid, unchangeable, and that if we were to die, that the world would somehow just keep going. But they don't believe that at all. They believe that the world is really pure consciousness. It doesn't have a basis on its own or separate from consciousness itself, and that it is consciousness that can change the external world. And so, when you begin to see that, if you can come to that point of view, then you can see that things can actually be altered from within, and the within can alter what is without.
Yeah.
I think that there's a very strong, unanimous social agreement amongst human beings because we experience the same things externally in our world, and our brain really maps a reflection of all the experiences that we can have in our world. So there is a unanimous agreement of the laws that govern 3 dimensions, 4 dimensions even. And we live by those laws, and our brain really has mapped all the possibilities and potentials over pretty much eons of experience. But there's still room for the brain to grow, and there's still room for us to evolve to greater virtues and to greater levels of mind. If that's the case, then it means then that we have to begin to break from the social agreements and the social consciousness that keeps everything intact and everything in order. That means then that we have to really gain knowledge that's outside of convention. Whether it's social convention or religious convention or scientific convention, we have to reach for information and knowledge that is beyond the boundaries of what's currently accepted. Now, to personalize that information and knowledge means we're going to apply it to actually try it out to have a new experience.
Beyond any reasonable doubt, the new science is showing us that our hearts do much more than simply pump blood through our bodies. We can build a machine to do that. An artificial heart will pump the blood. But we now understand that our heart does much, much more than simply pump blood.
This is like, stand in amazement of our bodies as well as in our deeper aspects of potential that the heart reveal. The heart produces a tremendously powerful broadband electromagnetic field as it beats. When the electromagnetic patterns of the heart are imaged, they form patterns similar to those given off by a magnet. A magnet's magnetic field can be demonstrated by placing iron fillings on a sheet of paper and holding the magnet underneath it. The filings will quickly move onto the paper into a pattern, aligning themselves to the magnetic field that the magnet produces. But the magnetic field produced by the heart is not located on a flat piece of paper. It extends around the body in a torus, a fractal sort of spherical shape that continually flows through space. Okay? You get that? The heart is a magnetic vortex that flows in a torus, the same shape that is the electromagnetic field of the planet Earth. So this torus shape of the heart corresponds exactly in a fractal relationship probably to the electromagnetic field of the Earth. Does everyone know what a torus is, that kind of flow of shape? It's like the core of the Earth, or the core of the center, and the flow comes up and around in this circular movement. Okay? Yeah, like a donut kind of. And it's a very basic energy flow pattern. I already knew that was true in terms of, the electromagnetic field of the Earth. It was quite exciting to realize that literally the physical heart works in the same way. Okay, now be ready to be amazed and stand in respect of the heart for this next statement. Okay. Measured with magnetic field meters, the electromagnetic field that the heart produces is 5,000 times more powerful than that created by the brain. Whoa. 5,000 times more powerful than the field generated by the brain. While strongest at the body's surface, it extends out further than the human measuring devices can detect. The most sensitive electromagnetic devices human beings know how to make can still detect it at up to 10 feet from the body. But there's actually no limit to how far the field can extend. So, I think that's pretty amazing.
So, these so-called spiritual endeavors, is there a way to create measurable results?
There's, in our spiritual endeavors, and spirit is always kind of a connotation that people get stuck on, but in the application of our life is spiritual. Everything in life is spiritual, but in the application of it, there is absolutely a way in which we can begin to see measurable results in our life. It takes practice, and it's a skill.
The eyes see, or the eyes of the heart see differently, those kinds of awarenesses. But again, it's quite exciting. There is a section in here where he goes in and talks about how they're scientifically now really discovering that the heart functions literally as a second brain, and that the heart is kind of directly wired to the brain. And so they're in continual communication. And that's the other thing about this heart being the magnetic vortex that extends. It also gives us our own understanding of how and why we influence one another, because our fields are, of course, interpenetrating all the time, aren't they?
Is affected by emotion, and when you're heart of heart, or when you have, say, a jolt that your heart skips a beat. All these terms that we use are based on our most of our mental focus, our emotion comes from our heart. When we feel something from our heart, it literally is from the heart and not the mind. And it's almost like we've given the mind all the credit.
Do you really think that the heart is connected to the soul and the intuition?
Yes, I think the power of the heart is to be connected with who you are at the deepest level. So, if you would compare the mind with the heart, if you're on a boat on a river, then the mind can only see the next bend, the next turn on the river. But if you're on the same boat on the river, and if you are the heart, you can see the whole river from source to sea. But it's our challenge to learn to trust the heart. And we can only do that if we start experimenting with it. So the heart sees everything from a higher perspective. Why? Because it's our higher self, it's our soul. It's our true identity. And if you look at all spiritual traditions and religions, then the heart has been described as a source of wisdom and intelligence. And Lao Tzu and the Buddha and Jesus, they all said it. And science is now confirming that the heart can see events before they take place. So even science now says, okay, the heart knows things before our mind, our eyes can see it. Yeah.
Just at that. Nothing's as fascinating to me though as the brain cells. I think that that's just awesome. I guess they're not brain cells in the heart, they're heart cells, but they're neural connections, and there's over 40,000 of them. Just makes me wonder, what's my heart thinking today?
Our heart literally has its own brain. It is called neural intelligence. And it is the heart intelligence that our ancestors understood that gives new meaning to the role of the human heart in our lives today.
Is coherency. Now you can talk about coherency in terms of brain waves, that when brain waves become more coherent, that's a good state of consciousness. But the heart as well, that's why being, this spiritual tradition that says, like hang out with realized beings, it's like just to be in their energy field, you begin to become coherent to their field. You begin to entrain to that field. And so when the heart is open, people feel good around that.
Today, our world, our physical world, is made of fields of energy, electrical fields and magnetic fields of energy.
That they take. They believe that the people that are living in their hearts will all come together as one living being, that we actually begin to breathe together, very much like the dolphins and the whales. Our biorhythms even connect, and we become one. This is hard to imagine, but it's kind of like the cells in our body create our body, and it makes us. We become cells in a global body that create a very higher form of consciousness.
And you'll notice that as your heart opens more, people are drawn to that. People say, well, I feel good when I'm with you, or I feel safe with you, I feel I can talk to you. That's a response on the human level to the field of the heart being open and available. It's like an invitation, So yes, I'd say the heart has a deeper wisdom, and there's a reason why the ancients called it the doorway to everything. And this isn't to pit it against the brain, because the brain, there's the ajna center, which is up in the head area, and there's esoteric aspects to that as well, of course. But in the end, according to the most esoteric level teachings that I've had access to, it all comes back to the heart and the ajna.
What our own science now is showing us is that while our brain is certainly important, and when I was in school, my textbook taught me that the brain is where the action is, that the brain is the master organ in the body. Well, interestingly enough, the brain's not the first organ that forms in the human body, it's the human heart. And as the organ develops, it begins to regulate the chemistry through the rest of the body. And what we now know is that our heart sends the signals to the brain that trigger the chemistry in the brain that's released into the body. The electrical signal between the heart and the brain is the key to understanding this relationship. When we are in what is called coherence, an experience that is measured as 0.10 hertz, 0.10 cycles per second, when we're feeling the feelings that allow us to experience 0.10 cycles per second, that is when our coherence is optimum. That's when we're sending the optimum signal between our heart and our brain. That's when our brain begins to release life-affirming chemistry into our bodies. Healing chemistry, our immune systems are strongly enhanced. Our anti-aging hormones, such as DHEA, increase 100% over a 3-minute period of time just from having this feeling.
And my basic understanding as a soul level healer, which correlates to the heart, is that the role of the healer is to allow the life of the soul to flow, to see the ways in which it has become rigidified or frozen into certain predictable repeating patterns, and to allow the inherent freedom of unfoldment to come forth, okay? So if I reference back to that talk on the soul, one of the soul's qualities is its extreme sensitivity and its impressionability. And that very sensitivity and impressionability is what allows it then to get imprinted with patterns, emotional patterns that freeze it, okay? And so the idea is to release those fixations, okay? And the research that's done on the heart in terms of this is similar, that when left to its own, there's a certain degree of pattern within chaos, let's say, but there's a wider range of how it can show up. And what illness does, or what illness results from, because it's probably not a direct cause and effect, but relates to those frequencies and permutations becoming lessened. And so that's why, you know, we see it, say symbolically, would correlate to older people if they become really set in their ways. You know, that literally the heart as well, if it gets set in certain frequencies, isn't as healthy as when it's allowed a more dynamic expression. Does that make
Once we have that experience now, it begins to change the way in which our world should show up or present itself to us. But an experience isn't enough. We have to be able to reproduce that experience until it can become automatic. Once we do that, now we're beginning to master a new level of mind, and then we start to break from the agreements of four dimensions. We begin to defy the principles of this social agreement, and it is a collective consciousness, and the collective order allows the quantum field to respond to that, but by the same means, we have the ability to be able to process greater levels of mind, which then starts to separate us from this social agreement, and now we become individuals.
Speak. Hellinger liked to clarify 4 different types of emotions or feelings. And one he called secondary emotions. And those were the ones that he felt most often could get dragged out into years of therapy or telling your story. And the impact of what these secondary emotions, or what some people call reactive emotions, the indicator of that is that they leave a person feeling weak. They leave a person still somewhat in victim mode. And for the person who is with them or being asked to respond, there's a certain feeling of manipulation. There's a certain feeling of being asked to buy into something. So it's not an expression of feeling that the heart just naturally opens to or is touched by. Although the open heart, of course, is open with everything. But do you know that difference in terms of when we feel touched? And then there are what he calls primary feelings. And primary feelings can be very deep and very intense. The heart tends to naturally respond to those. And they leave a person in their wake. The person is left stronger and more clarified. So that becomes part of the distinction. And then he talked about the things the constellations are particularly good at accessing, which are emotions that come from entanglements. So that emotions that aren't really even your own emotions. So a common example he uses is anger, where let's say you're experiencing anger with your partner, but if you really looked into a constellation, you might discover that there was an ancestor where there had been anger towards the opposite sex, and you're simply entangled in that pattern of anger towards the opposite sex. So there are those kinds of emotions. And then there are what he called meta emotions. And meta emotions are more like what we're talking about in terms of when the heart is released. So the emotions of awe, of reverence, of delight, those kind of emotions come from the greater soul or through the greater capacity of the heart. So anyway, I don't know if that's useful, but certainly in terms of understanding the power of the heart, you have to get beyond any kind of hallmark sentimentality of viewing the heart simply as the domain of personal emotions, because what we're pointing to and what is possible is so much beyond that, but certainly includes that. And that's part of what enhances and allows for our humanity, our shared humanity, and having this human experience and letting that be totally okay. So, okay.
You mean from a Mayan point of view?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they have different layers of this that they speak about to the world. And primarily, their point of view is that the people who are able to make this transition are only those that are living in their heart. Those that are in their brain are not able to make this transition. They are not harmed. They just take a different road, and they'll eventually end up through, from their point of view, in the same place, but it's a real different route that they take.
More question about
So, first of all, if you want to learn to manifest from the heart, you first have to identify the intentions of your heart, and you have to realize that you're not a personality with a body. You are a soul who lives in the body temporarily, and the soul is your divine self. The soul is who you really are. The soul is what still will be your identity even if you die. So the soul is your real self. So this soul has intentions, and your job in this life is to figure out intentions of the soul. Once you figure out intentions of the soul, then you start to live from those intentions, and then your life will be magical. You will have the synchronicities, you will meet the right people at the right time, and everything falls together. One of the speakers in the film, Mark Nepo, says a fish cannot drown in water, a bird cannot fall from the sky. Each creature must find their own God-given element. And he says it's easy for fish, it's easy for birds, they know their element, but it's not so easy for us human beings, because we don't get the manual, we don't get, our blueprint, what we're supposed to do. And I think we can only find our element and our purpose when we come into our heart. That's when we wake up. That's when we are no longer the living dead. That's when we start to see that everything is connected. That's when we start to see that we have so much wisdom, intelligence, and power available to us. And when you start to see that you're just more than this body, and you are a divine soul, you just know that you can do anything and manifest anything. But the soul has intentions, and your job is to identify the intentions of the soul, not the intentions of the personality and the ego. My ego wanted to be a lawyer, and my soul wanted to do what I'm doing right now, writing books, producing films, and so there can be a conflict. But your life really starts, you really start to wake up when you realize that you have a soul and the soul has intentions.
The power of the human heart is so deeply acknowledged in many indigenous traditions that there is one tradition in Mesoamerica from a tribe that's actually called the Kogi. The Kogi so deeply emphasize the power and the significance of our relationship to our hearts that when their children are born, for the first couple of years of their lives, the children are kept almost in completely darkened conditions and kept separate from the physicality of the world around them, so that the world that they develop first is the inner knowing of their heart before they develop the perceptions of the world around them. And in doing that, as the basis, then they are exposed to the sensuality of the physical world around them and other people around them. And their orientation is so very, very different. Now, many people in the West, when we hear that, it sounds very strange to us. Some people think it may actually sound cruel. But the net result of the way that these young people begin to live is their entire frame of reference becomes heart-based, and that is the perspective from which they begin to experience their world, rather than their minds discounting the power of the heart. And I'm not suggesting that we need to deprive ourselves of the physical world to have the experience. But what I am saying is I think there are things that we can encourage in our young people early in our lives and now as adults that we can learn for ourselves to cultivate and develop what is called the heart intelligence, this power of our hearts to inform us of relationships, of experiences in the world that we simply cannot perceive through our mind alone.
And is there something, you know, when we talk about the environment, we have friends, we have media, we have aesthetics, you know, of the home we live in, we have certain amounts of nature or not. Is there a order of what's the most significant in terms of what actually affects our experience, or is it just a conglomerate of everything?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, when we have experiences, right? When we're in the midst of an experience, everything we're seeing and smelling and tasting and feeling and hearing, all of our five senses plug us into the environment. And as we see different people or interact in relationships or go to different places and do different things or recognize different things at different times and at different places, really the end product of an experience is called an emotion or a feeling. So feelings and emotions then cause us to remember experiences better. So most people, by a certain point in their life, they stop learning and they start feeling. And when we use feelings as a barometer to predict a future experience, we're really viewing the future based on the past. And so this is where people have difficulty in changing, because you can't go to a new future holding on to the emotions of the past. You have to literally lay them down.
See, that's fascinating to me though, because there's a lot of information out there and advice that we actually need to tune in to our feelings, we need to drop into our bodies, we need to trust our reactions to things that come up in order to make the best decisions. But essentially what I'm hearing is that that's not necessarily the best way forward.
Well, there's two definitions that have to be created here and distinctions as a result of it. So when you react to a situation in your life, you react with a certain degree of adrenal hormones, and you feel angry, or you feel fearful, or you feel unworthy or insecure. Those hormones produce a very strong chemical change in your brain and body, and that's called stress. Stress is when your body's knocked out of homeostasis, when it's knocked out of balance. Now, when we are living in that refractory period of chemicals, there's always a gap between the way things appear and the way things really are. And that's when you say, I should have never said that, I should have never done that, I should have never thought that, I should have never written that email. Because those emotions force us to act like an amped up animal with a large memory bank. Now, when you have an intuitive feeling, what happens when you are trusting your feelings, the gut, you're not reacting so much so that those adrenal hormones are running. In fact, you're tuning out the environment. You're actually tuning in to what feels right to you in terms of your soul, or in terms of how your body aligns to something. That's a very different intuition or a different sense of trusting your feelings than when you're reacting to something in your environment that causes you to move out of balance. And most people, they live in that state, and they call that a normal state of consciousness, and that's the altered state of consciousness.
And I think this, again, I think it's one of the great frontiers. There's an organization in Northern California, a pioneering research organization that has been formed specifically to explore the power of the human heart in very unconventional ways, and it is called the Institute of Heart Math, H-E-A-R-T, capital M-A-T-H, but it's all one word. I'm not an employee of Heart Math, but I have known these people almost since their inception, since the early 90s. We've worked together on some very, very powerful projects. They are scientists, engineers, medical doctors, computer scientists, physicists, academics from many different careers that have left those careers to pool their resources for the sole purpose of exploring the power of the human heart in ways that we have never explored in the West, in modern science in the past. We all know that the heart can pump blood, for example, but you can build a machine to pump the blood. What we're finding What HeartMath is now finding is that may be the least of what the heart does. The heart does so much more than simply pump blood. And we're only beginning to understand. For example, what the people at the Institute of HeartMath have documented as scientific fact, published in peer-reviewed journals, is the fact that the human heart is surrounded by a field of energy. It's electrical energy and it's magnetic energy. You can measure it with conventional equipment if it's tuned properly. This field is called a torus, a tube torus. It looks essentially like a donut that extends from the physical heart into the world around us for a distance of about 5 to 8 feet. And I asked one of the primary researchers, I said, if this field is so powerful, I said, why does it stop at 5 feet or 8 feet? And he said, that's the limitation of my equipment. He said, if we had better equipment, what the equipment is showing is that the heart field probably extends for a distance of many, many miles. On the physical level, on the quantum level, he said it's probably infinite because it's very difficult to tell where this electrical and magnetic field ends in the quantum field. Well, the value of knowing this, what it says to us is if we're in a room with hundreds of people and we're all within 5 to 8 feet of one another, we may be physically separate, but we are sharing a heart field. And the longer we're in that room together, the more our fields begin to meld together. There is a relationship between the heart and the brain where the two organs may tune to one another in a very specific way. I've mentioned earlier that it is the signal from the heart to the brain that tells the brain what kind of chemistry to release into the body. What I didn't say is that the quality of that signal is called coherence. So when we have what is called a high coherence between the heart and the brain, which can be measured, it's quantified, it's a very, very low frequency, 0.10 hertz is optimum coherence. If we can create a feeling in our hearts that generates 0.10 hertz between our heart and our brain, we are now in optimum coherence. And what that means is that we're functioning optimally, that this is the best signal that we can create. And in this way, this is where our brain now is releasing powerful chemistry into our bodies. Super immune response comes from 0.10 hertz. There's a new science that's called epigenetics. Epigenetics means above genetics. It means there's something happening above our DNA that influences the DNA. What the studies are showing is that human emotion, heart-based emotion, is one of the signals that literally influences the DNA in our bodies. It is now very well noted that longevity is directly linked to these feelings, for example. And many of the systems in the body that seem mysterious to us, and we're looking for chemicals and drugs to turn those systems on. What the studies are showing is that emotion is a signal that will enable those systems. For example, aging. We know that in the aging process, every time the cell divides, at the end of the DNA, there are portions of DNA that are called telomeres, or telomeres. They're pronounced both ways. They become brittle as we go through the aging process, and each time the cell divides, a little bit of that telomere is no longer able to reproduce. It breaks off. It's because it is brittle. And when it breaks off enough times, it can't reproduce. That's what we call the aging process in the cell. Well, interestingly, our bodies have an enzyme that is designed to heal and to repair those telomeres. It is called telomerase. And the question has been, how do we activate telomerase? And what has been found is that it is the quality of emotion between the heart and the brain that literally can activate the telomerase and have a direct impact upon the aging of our bodies. So the question is, what kinds of emotions create those kinds of effects? They're the emotions that our mother has always told us about and that our most cherished traditions have always said, positive heart-based emotions such as care, such as gratitude, such as appreciation, compassion. Those are the kinds of experiences that we may have in our hearts that literally give our bodies a new lease on life. The chemistry responds to those. Our indigenous ancestors knew it, but it wasn't science. Our own science is bearing it out. So this is one example of where there is a knowledge from our past. It's ancient, it's not obsolete. And I think it has direct bearing on where we're going with our studies today. If we can marry the wisdom of the past with the best science of today, marry them together into something that's greater than the science all by itself, and greater than the spiritual traditions all by themselves. Marry these two great ways of knowing together into a wisdom that maybe has not been in this world for a very long time. That gives us the edge, the evolutionary edge, to deal with the crises that we are faced with in our world that maybe our ancestors didn't have. And that's one of the reasons I'm so optimistic about where we're going, because of the willingness to embrace the wisdom of the past and honor the best science of our time today. It was 40,000, every human, everyone listening today, I'm going to speak to you directly again, you have in your heart approximately 40,000 specialized cells that are like brain cells, but they're not in your brain. They're in your heart. They're called sensory neurites. So they are brain-like cells in the heart. They are concentrated in such a degree that they actually call this the little brain in the heart. So what does this mean? This isn't a metaphor. And I was just in Europe, and many of the people there, they said, well, you know, this is a metaphor, right? You're using this as an analogy. And I'm saying, no, this is literal. These neurites in the heart, the little brain in the heart, they can learn independently from the neurons in our brain. They can think independently from the neurons in our brain. They can remember independently from the neurons in our brain, and they communicate with us separately from the neurons in our brain in a language that we may or may not recognize, because we are conditioned to see the world through our brain, and if we're lucky, at some point in our adult lives, we get to connect with our hearts. So we have now access to these sensory neurites. We can work with the brain independently of our heart, and I think most of us know how to do that very well. We can work with the heart independently of the brain. Scientists say it's all about the brain, forget about the heart. And many, I've been around a lot of my friends who say it's all about the heart, forget about the brain. They actually chastise the brain, you know, the left brain is this bad thing. But here's what the science is showing us. Both of those ways of viewing ourselves are incomplete. When we marry the heart and the brain together, when we harmonize the heart and the brain, this is the extended neural network that makes us different from all other forms of life. This is where our deepest empathy, compassion, intuition comes from.
Of course. just you reach a certain age and you realize that that any man who hasn't figured out that women are amazing is missing out. But, you know, I think that the greatest thing that we can do for ourselves is really teach our children how to take time for themselves. Now, I have 3 children, and they know that when I'm in a meditation, from the time they were very young, and they're all pretty much grown up now, but when I'm in a meditation, they know that that's my time, and that when I connect to Source and I get up as somebody else, I'm more patient, I'm more loving, I'm more caring, I'm more present, I'm more spontaneous and poised, that they know that time is for me, because the rest of my day I'm serving. You know when you're changing is when you stop talking about it. Because when you are truly changing, you can't go to church and shake hands and say peace be with you and then get in your car and cut everybody off on the way out of the parking lot. You can't say I don't like the war in Iraq and be arguing with your next door neighbor or your coworker. You have to be the living example of everything you want to see in the world in terms of change. If you don't like greed, start giving. You know, you have to demonstrate it, and when you do, you give people permission to do the same, because they're going to observe you doing exactly what they're afraid to do, but they know it's the right thing to do. So the way we transform the world is we transform ourselves. The way you transform a culture is you transform an individual. And individual by individual, when we stop looking outside of us and we say, that world is a reflection of some aspect of me. If everybody in the world did that simultaneously, imagine how the world would change.
So in whatever way is comfortable for you to touch your heart center now, that will draw your awareness and that will promise that you have shifted from your mind into your heart. Step number one. And I'm going to do the same right here. And just allow your awareness to move to the place where you feel that touch. And step number two is I'm going to invite you now, I'm going to invite you to slow your breathing just a little bit, to maybe 5 seconds on the inhale or 5 seconds on the out breath, the exhale, or whatever is comfortable for you. And here's why this is important. This sends a very, very powerful signal to your body. The first signal, shifting from your mind to your heart, that says I'm turning my attention inward. That's powerful. The second signal right now is when you slow your breathing. The only time you would breathe this way is when you are in a place where you feel safe. So you're telling your body, right now, I am in a place that's safe. And that frees your body to let go of the stress hormones and the feelings of stress. And when that happens, it awakens the healing chemistry, because your body can only do one or the other. So now that we're letting go of those stress hormones, we're now giving our body permission to awaken the healing chemistry in our bodies. Powerful immune response, anti-aging hormones, all of those. So we're breathing a little slower from the place where we feel the touch, telling our body we're safe. All right, the third step, this is very, very key, this is very powerful, very potent, is about feeling. And I'm going to invite you now to create a feeling in your heart where you feel the touch, where you're breathing. To the best of your ability, if you can feel one or some combination of the following 4 feelings: care for anything or anyone, appreciation for anything or anyone, gratitude or compassion. Care, appreciation, gratitude, compassion. And what the researchers have found is that these 4 key words will trigger the experience between our heart and our brain to create that coherence, 0.1 hertz. To the best of your ability, feel those feelings as you breathe from your heart center in the place where you feel the touch. I'm going to give you just a moment to do that. I'm doing the same right here. All right, and if you'll take one more deep breath, please. And as you release that breath, what I want you to know is this act, this very ancient, very primal act, it is the key to the deepest truth of who you are as an individual, who you are in this world. This is where the super learning comes from, or when you're working to solve or create something new, a new painting, a new piece of music, to write a book, to create poetry, something new, it comes from this deep space. This is the process that gives you resilience to a changing world and allows you to embrace change in a really healthy way. And once again, if you're not into any of those things, it is a trigger for over 1,300 biochemical reactions, from the anti-aging hormones that we didn't even really address in here today, but I do in the new books, to our immune response, cardiovascular health, all of these from this very simple, ancient, primal, and simple, easy act. So I invite you now to take one more deep breath. I'm doing the same, and release gently. So you're shifting your awareness from the act of harmonizing your heart and your brain, but I want you to know that the cascade of biochemical connections that you have initiated, it doesn't end when you open your eyes. It doesn't end when you take that deep breath. They will continue, and what the laboratory studies have shown, again, is that they will last at least 6 hours. The immune response in your mouth, the SIGA immune response, most powerful, first line of defense in our immune system, is kicked into overdrive from doing this right now, and it lasts over 6 hours. And all you did was to have a feeling and to breathe in the most natural way. And I've had people say to me, Greg, it can't be that simple. And I say, I believe it is precisely this simple, because we live in a world that is simple until we make it complex. Nature is simple. Science is simple. Until we use big words and a lot of equations to describe that world. But it all comes down to you and me, Earth and God. And that relationship has to be a simple relationship.
And demonstrate it. And if you can be peace, and you can be compassion, and you can be love, and you can be kindness and generosity, and you can be creative and genius and inspired, everybody else will say, I can do it too.